In August 1940, the British Royal Air Force entered the airspace of Nazi Germany for the first time and bombed Berlin. Although only a wooden pavilion was destroyed, the windows of several residential buildings were shattered, and 10 people died. Berlin, the capital of Germany, still fell into extreme panic. Millions of residents took shelter in basements. That evening, Nazi authorities ordered a complete blackout in Berlin. All 65,000 gas lamps were turned off. 1,200 arc mercury lamps were removed, and all residents were required to cover their windows with thick black cloth. From sunset until sunrise the next day, anyone who exposed any artificial light source would face a fine for the first offense, imprisonment for the second, and immediate execution by firing squad for the third. For example, on the evening of November 8, 1941, a brewery owner in Pankow, Berlin, shone a flashlight out the window to check the boiler. After being discovered by the patrol and failing to turn off the light, he was executed 15 days later. On April 3, 1942, a 17-year-old girl in Spandau, Berlin, was using a candle on the roof to write a letter to her boyfriend at the front line. After being discovered by the patrol, she was also sentenced to death. However, although the blackout measures were implemented, factories in Berlin still operated on a 2-shift or even 3-shift system, with the afternoon shift workers working until 10 o'clock in the evening. After finishing their shift, because of the blackout, these workers had to make their way home in complete darkness, with no lights at all. However, darkness meant the perfect opportunity for crime. No one would see the attacker's face, and no one would notice the attack. October 4, 1940, an ordinary Friday evening, Gertrude Ditter, a 20-year-old woman, was found dead. Her husband was a soldier fighting on the front line. 2 months later, on the morning of December 5th, 2 crime scenes were discovered simultaneously. The first victim was Elfriede Frank, who was found near the embankment of the Suburban Express Railway. Subsequent forensic reports indicated that her skull had been shattered by a blunt instrument, with extensive abrasions and comminuted fractures on her body. Clearly, she had been attacked and killed while on her way home by train, and then thrown off the train. The other victim was Irmgard Fries, a 19-year-old woman, whose body was found not far from her home. Fries had been raped and beaten to death. Shortly after, on December 22nd, the body of the 4th victim, Elizabeth, was discovered by several railway workers. Her fate was the same as Elfried's. She had suffered severe blows to the head and was thrown off the train, with extensive abrasions and comminuted fractures on her body. 6 days later, on the morning of December 28, 1940, the Berlin police found Gertrude Siewert, who was severely injured near the railway embankment. She was the first victim who had been attacked but did not die immediately. However, despite being urgently taken to the hospital, she eventually died from her severe injuries due to inadequate medical conditions and the prolonged exposure of her wounds. Meanwhile, the Berlin police officially combined the 5 murder cases in an internal report, as all the victims were women, murdered during the blackout period, and 3 of them had skull fractures and were thrown from moving trains. However, at that time, Nazi Germany had already launched World War II. In order not to affect the morale of the rear supply personnel and the soldiers on the front line, the Nazi government ordered the media and journalists not to report any information about the serial murders. Berlin police were also not allowed to publicly seek information about the serial murders or warn the public of the dangers of traveling by suburban express train at night. Unable to openly inquire about clues regarding the attacker, the Berlin police could only conduct their investigation under the guise of internal security consolidation, a method that was both slow and time-consuming. In addition to this, the Berlin police assigned 2 plainclothes officers to each train carriage. Female officers would disguise themselves as factory workers, nurses, or postal workers. And if there were not enough female officers, male officers would even cross-dress to blend in. In reality, this sting operation failed to catch the attacker, but the officers on Blackout ended up arresting some individuals who had committed minor offenses instead. January 5, 1941, Hedwig A. Bauer, 5 months pregnant, was found unconscious near the embankment of the Suburban Express Railway. Like Siewert, she had been attacked and thrown from the train. Unfortunately, later that evening, Hedwig died in the hospital from her severe injuries. But, before her death, the clue she provided perfectly matched what Siewert had said, that their attacker was a railway worker dressed in a black uniform. Initially, Siewert's statement had not attracted the police's attention, as it could have been mistaken. However, Hedwig's words confirmed the authenticity of this lid. At that time, Berlin had 2 million male residents, and only 8,000 of them were railway workers. So, from this point on, the police could finally narrow down their investigation without wasting a lot of time and manpower on other areas. Soon after, on February 11th, the body of the 7th victim, Johanna Voigt, was discovered. In the following 5 months, the police were questioning railway workers. Since they were not allowed to disclose information about the murders, their investigation progress was very slow. By June, out of the 8,000 railway workers, only a little over 5,000 had been questioned. In addition, the attacker did not commit another crime for 4 months after killing Johanna, until July 3, 1941, when he struck again. This time, the victim was 35-year-old Frieda Koziol, the 8th and final victim. Meanwhile, several railway workers approached the police, saying that one of their colleagues, a man named Paul Ogorzow, had been acting very strangely over the past 2 years. Paul was a seemingly ordinary, average-height, short-haired white man. Initially, he was a capable and trustworthy colleague. However, he now often made misogynistic remarks, talked about his fascination with murder, and during work hours, he would always leave his post, climb over the warehouse fence, and disappear into the night. Later, when questioned about his absences, Paul claimed that he was sneaking out to meet a mistress whose husband was a soldier. After receiving this information, Wilhelm Ludke, the head of the homicide department of the Berlin police, personally examined Paul's uniform. He found numerous small brown stains on the cuffs of Paul's uniform jackets and the inner sides of the trouser legs. On July 12, 1941, the police arrested Paul, and the interrogation took place in a small room with only a single light bulb due to the blackout restrictions. During the interrogation, Wilhelm placed the X-rays and the skulls of 2 victims on the table, indicating to Paul that they had sufficient evidence. In the end, Paul admitted his crimes, but attributed his violent actions to his long-term alcohol abuse, and blamed his drinking on a Jewish doctor who had failed to cure his gonorrhea. Attempting to deflect responsibility and align with Nazi anti-Semitic narratives. Hearing these, Wilhelm did not buy it, instead attributing Paul's motives to excessive sexual impulses, an attraction to resistance, pathological misogyny, and not related to racial revenge. The court also rejected the claim of medical malpractice and concluded the case as a common criminal serial murder. The S-Bahn murderer Paul Ogorzow was not only a railway worker but also an ardent Nazi. Born in September 1912 in the village of Montau in East Prussia, he was the illegitimate child of a farm worker named Marie, and he never met his father. Age 12, he was adopted by a farmer from Havelland. Over time, he first worked as a farmhand in the village of Nauen, then moved to a foundry in Brandenburg an der Havel, and later relocated to Berlin. In there, young Paul joined the Nazi Party and subsequently the Nazi Party's paramilitary organization, the Sturmabteilung. The Sturmabteilung's membership largely consisted of veterans, unemployed youths, and malcontents. It was a quasi-military violent group and the Nazi Party's enforcers, intervening in elections, engaging in street violence and intimidation, and disrupting opponents' rallies. The Sturmabteilung played a significant role in Hitler's rise to power. Before his arrest, Paul was a squad leader in the Sturmabteilung. In 1934, Paul was employed by the Deutsche Reichsbahn, working as a track layer in the suburban express railway system in Berlin. Soon after, he was promoted to assistant signalman at the Ruhleben marshalling yard, located in the eastern suburbs of Berlin near Karlshorst, which also became the area where Paul committed most of his crimes. In 1937, Paul married Gertrude Ziegelmann, a female saleswoman 2 years his senior, and the couple had 1 son and 1 daughter, living in an apartment in Karlshorst. Usually, neighbors would see Paul tending to cherry trees in the small garden and playing with his children in the alleyways. However, these were all part of his disguise. For example, during the trial, his wife testified that he was suspicious and violent, often beating her and repeatedly accusing her of infidelity without any basis. After his arrest, Paul made a systematic and detailed confession to the police, enabling the investigators to reconstruct his criminal trajectory. In late August 1939, Paul was still living in Karlshorst. After the outbreak of World War II, Friedrichsfeld and its surrounding areas became a well-known widow's street. Most of the men in that area had been conscripted into the army, leaving only women behind, and thus Paul targeted that area. He specifically targeted lone housewives and committed a total of 31 rape and robbery cases. During the attacks, he would either strangle the victims, threaten them with a knife, or beat them with a club. In the statements of the victims, all mentioned that the attacker was wearing a railway worker's uniform. In fact, he also made many murder attempts and gradually perfected his modus operandi through these attempts. From August 1939 to July 1940, Paul attacked and stabbed 3 women on 3 separate occasions, but he was unsuccessful in killing them. In August 1940, due to the power outages, female workers would take the train home, and so Paul chose the vicinity of trains and stations as his crime locations. In mid-August, Paul raped and beat a woman inside a train carriage. However, due to his inexperience, he mistakenly thought the woman was dead and left the scene. In September, he strangled another victim unconscious and threw her off a moving train, but she still survived. His most embarrassing attack occurred near a station when he attempted to rape a woman. Unbeknownst to him, the woman's husband and brother-in-law were waiting for her not far away. In the end, Paul was severely beaten and almost taken to the police station. Later, based on the experiences of his multiple failures, he completely refined his method of operation and began his career as a murderer. On July 24, 1941, Paul Ogorzow, known as the S-Bahn murderer, was sentenced to death by the higher regional court in Berlin. Additionally, fearing that the scandal would affect the morale of soldiers on the front lines, the Nazi authorities had expelled Paul from the Nazi Party several days before he was charged and immediately declared him a public enemy, because no soldier would want his woman to be attacked, especially if the attacker was a member of the Nazi Party. Only 1 day elapsed between the death sentence and its execution. On July 26th, Paul was executed by guillotine in the prison.